Thanks everyone for joining today's Space Syntax Lab seminars. Today, I'd like to welcome Fánel Contreras. She is an architect and researcher from Peru, and she graduated from the National University of Engineering in Lima in 2011 and holds an MSc degree in space syntax here from the Bauhaus. Fánel has experience working in various health, education, and mixed-use projects as an architect. She won second place at the Peruvian Architectural Biennale in 2022 for her research and received honorable mentions for her work in 2014 and 2016. She currently teaches at the Faculty of Architecture and Art at the National University of Engineering in Lima and is also part of a research group called HT3X, Inhabiting Experimental Territories, which focuses on applied research. And today she will talk about her research on how modernism influenced architecture schools in Latin America. And before we start, if you have any questions during the talk, please put them in the chat so we can address them after the presentation. And with this, I'd like to hand over to you, Fánel.
Hi, Kim. It's a pleasure for me to be here sharing my research. Okay, here we start. Well, this research came to life while I was a master's student in the recently renovated building of the Bartlett in London back in 2018. I was really intrigued about its spatial configuration and how different it was compared to my undergrad school. So I thought there was clearly a way of thinking embedded in that layout. And that made me think that probably there was thinking also embedded on my school. So those thoughts took me back to observe the school where I studied architecture, and wondering about the ideas behind that one, I came along with 3 other schools that seem to share some similar beliefs and importance to the local context. So architectural education in Latin America began in mid-1900s, with the exception of Mexico, where it began in late 1700s. However, it was not until 1950s that the first buildings purposely designed were built, which are these 4, and were conceived following debates about how architecture and cities in this area should be. So modernism was not merely a formal style or a revolution of construction systems. Instead, it embodied new ideas and visions of architecture and cities, which each building represented the core architectural principles of each designer. And this research analyzes 4 different schools in Latin America, all built in the 1950s. One in Lima, the other one is in Caracas, Venezuela, in Mexico, in Rio de Janeiro, in Brazil, and compares them with 2 other schools, that the Bauhaus School of Design of Walter Gropius and the Chandigarh College of Architecture from Le Corbusier. This also because both architects, Gropius and Le Corbusier, came to South America around that period and exchanged ideas with local architects. The main objective of this study is to identify the points of confluence between the perspective of the modern movement and each designer in their respective context, and how this way of thinking influenced the design in Latin American schools in 1950s in terms of spatial configuration, perception, and discourse, looking to go beyond the formal properties traditionally discussed. The secondary objective of this research is to understand how modernist ideas and their reinterpretation in the Latin American context are manifested in systems of space, more specifically in spatial characteristics and configuration that influence patterns of movement, interaction, and perception. And finally, the overall aim of this research is to expand on our understanding of modernist ideas from formal considerations to spatial dimensions in different contexts. So architecture and spatial configurations. The notion of architecture, according to Hillier, contains aspects within itself of both the product that is created and the intellectual process through which this creation occurs. Moreover, architecture is in essence the application of speculative and abstract thought to the non-discursive aspects of buildings. In this respect, and unlike other types of architectural buildings, architectural schools are a particular case point because they sometimes do not only represent the ideal of architecture that the ordinary institution pursue, they also represent the milieu of the subject of study with its pedagogical organization and social structure. So the analysis is theoretically framed by the laws of the generation of the form, as put forward by Hillier in his paper, The Architecture of Urban Object in 1989, where he argued that in order to understand the spatial system in its social and cultural complexity, it's necessary first to understand the material form and the spatial form, but also to understand the laws underlying the form in the first place. So these affirmations were made to describe city as an urban object, but I thought they could also explain architecture from the perspective of a building scale. The three types of laws are used here as a theoretical methodological guide to explore the questions raised by the research. And their purpose is to understand the architectural object from an integral perspective by bringing together the discourse, the spatial configuration, and the embodied experience. So he distinguished these three types of laws. The type one would be the laws of the generation of the form. The type two, the laws of how society uses and adapts the laws of the object to give a special form to different types of social relations, would be laws from space to society to space. And finally, laws from space to society. So it's the effect back of architectural form on society. So following that structure, the analysis is split into three sections. The first one is the discussion of the architectural ideas from Gropius and Le Corbusier as the two main representatives that came also to Latin America, alongside the Latin American designers and the schools they designed in order to determine the main points of comparison between modernist ideas and the ideas developed in Latin America. And this part of the analysis was conducted based on a convex analysis, J-graph, action analysis, and VGA analysis. The stage two would be a comparison of the discourse related to architectural education, program, and or pedagogical characteristics between the case studies and the existence of spaces with similar usages and their location in the spatial structure. And finally, in the third stage would be the evaluation of the relationship between space and people. And the evaluation was conducted only in one of the case studies, comparing the results from the VGA analysis with information obtained from the recorded observations by a static camera crew. So in the laws of the generation of the architectural form type 1, from an urban perspective, Hillier described the laws of the architectural form as laws governing the ways in which buildings can be aggregated to forms, towns, or urban areas. From a building scale perspective, space could be also considered as the element that makes up this architectural object. Okay. This table summarizes a little bit the main ideas by Gropius and Le Corbusier. And Le Corbusier and Gropius were both key figures of the modern movement, but each had a different concern. Gropius had a holistic perspective of architecture. The formal expression of architecture was for him the result of the combination of materials, technique, and function. On the other hand, Le Corbusier's main concern was the human scale, perception, and human experience in the building. But the main similarities between Gropius and Le Corbusier are the emphasis on the possibilities of their materiality as the means to generate different spatial arrangements that couldn't be possible before in other systems. So on the left, we have some details of Bauhaus, and on the right, the main facade of the Chandigarh College of Architecture. And comparing these ideas with the ideas of the Latin American designers, the early 20th century was a time of change and urban expansion in Latin America. Most of the countries celebrated their centenaries during that period, and there was a need to develop representative national projects. But it was after 1940s that architectural schools introduced modern concepts into their academic programs. During this period, Latin America played a crucial role in the development of modern architecture, since the previous centers such as Berlin, Paris, London, and New York had been affected by the Second World War. These are all buildings. So these are the 4 schools, the first ones in that period in each country. The big ones are from Caracas and Brazil, the one on the right. And now this is the one in Mexico and in Lima, Peru. So this is the layout on the same scale, so you can compare the size of the buildings. The first one down is the one in Lima, the second one is in Mexico, then is the one in Venezuela, and the big one is from Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. So getting into the first analysis. So the results from the convex analysis show that the CCA and the school in Lima had special configurations with higher values of integration, which means that both systems, both spatial configuration had shallow depth compared to the other buildings. Similarly, the core in both cases is in the circulation next to the courtyard. And there was also, and it has also the space with higher connectivity on each system. On the other hand, the school in Rio and Venezuela and the Bauhaus also share similar distribution of integration values. And the school in Mexico has the lowest integration values in the system with the high depth. This characteristic may be related to the fact that the school in Mexico is a complex of buildings consisting of 1 main building and 7 small ones that houses the design studio connected through roof corridors leading to the entrance of each building, giving the complex the sense of unity, but actually are a lot of buildings that make up the School of Architecture, which is this one here. Okay. So getting into the J-graph analysis, even though all buildings differ in spaces in total, the J-graph analysis show a similar distribution of type of spaces between the school in Lima, the one in Rio, and the one in Venezuela, which is this one is in Lima, Caracas, and Rio. And the other ones that share similarity is the one in Mexico and the CCA of Le Corbusier. So when comparing the quantity of A and D type of spaces, which influence the overall values of integration, and B and C, which is seems to cause segregation, the Bauhaus and the CCA have a percentage of A and D spaces higher percentage of A and D spaces, which is more than 60% respectively, while all the other cases are around 50%. The Bauhaus and the FAO Uni in Lima buildings have the highest amount of D types of spaces, meaning that the spatial structure has a greater potential for exploration and encounters than the other buildings. So then getting into the action analysis, the action analysis showed that some similarities arise between these case studies. The lines with higher integration in the CCA, the School of Lima, Rio, and Mexico tend to form square rings around. So this is the one of Le Corbusier, the one in Lima, and also the one in Mexico. While the school in Venezuela lines form a triangular element. We are going to here, I think, can be seen better. And the Bauhaus building is kind of a deformed wheel pattern. The school in Rio has two internal courtyards, but the actual ring surrounds both courtyards rather than each one separately. And the school in Mexico also tend to form rings, gathering all the buildings in one complex. So in terms of intelligibility at the ground level, the school in Caracas, Lima, and the Bauhaus and the CCA share similar R values around 0.7, meaning that they have a slight relation or high intelligibility compared to the ones in Rio and Mexico. There are around 0.45 with a lower value. In the VGA analysis, the evaluation of visibility and permeability through the help of will help me to explain the sensorial experience and the spatial characteristics in the spatial layout. The experience are what we see, and we can walk around the building. And the difference between them may explain the spatial properties of each building, showing visual relationships as a result of the spatial form and the degree of transparency of the materials. So the school in Mexico, Lima, and the CCI buildings have more exterior spaces with higher visual integration being the last to their courtyards. On the other hand, the Bauhaus at the school in Venezuela, this is the one in Venezuela, which has like a negative difference, and the Bauhaus. Okay, yes, had more interior spaces with higher visual integration, and the one in Rio had the main entrance and the hall with high integration, which combines interior and exterior areas with high integration. The permeability analysis show higher levels in the main hall area at the Bauhaus and the School of Lima and Caracas. And the one in Rio spaces with higher degree of permeability were located on the first floor. And in the case of the CCA building, on the corridor that connects the design studio, which is around here. So this research also brings to light the importance of this kind of the spatial experience and the perceptions through how the spaces are defined, like with textures or the glass facade and all those elements. Okay, so going back to here, the comparative BGA showed in dark red a significant difference between permeability and visibility on the ground floor among all case studies. In the Bauhaus, the difference in the BGA analysis is mainly here on the kind of a C-shaped building, and is caused, which is shown graphically. So this visual relationship is due to the transparency of the facade that gives this sense of unity, spatial unity in this building. In the CCA and the school in Lima, the courtyard and surrounding spaces were the greatest difference between the two measures, where the two measures are concentrated. The school in Rio and the school in Mexico, the greatest difference can be found in the entrances and corridors around the internal gardens and in the roof corridors, respectively. And these are the spaces that connects the main buildings with the design studios, which are these corridors. So finally, the school in Rio is really, the school in Caracas is a really interesting case point, because in the locations where permeability is higher than visibility on the ground floor, most of the windows are above eye level, and the semi-transparent materials that visually link the axis to the exterior dissipate the integration values. So the spaces with a positive difference are only the auditorium, which are here, and the museum. So this one, it was really an interesting case. So it can be seen better here when I kind of translate those measures in a convex drawing. So it is possible to identify a mean value per space, and which ones are the ones that have kind of perceptual difference between what you can access or not, and what you can see, which is something that share in common all schools except this one. So laws from space, from society to space. These laws are defined as those that society uses and adapts in the architectural object in order to give a special form a different type of social relations. This stage of analysis compares the discourse related to architectural education programs and pedagogical characteristics, if available, between the case studies, the existence of spaces with similar usages, and their location in the spatial structure. So these are all the plans of the buildings, highlighting, for example, the design studios, the regular classrooms, and all the library. This map were compared with the results taken from the convex analysis. And it was possible to observe that the learning spaces here in the Bauhaus and the school in Caracas and Rio are more segregated than the ones in the CCA and the school in Lima. In the same way, the design studios are usually more segregated than the regular classroom spaces. From the analysis, it was possible to identify also the idea of integration of the arts from Gropius in the pedagogical curriculum and program. However, the school in Caracas building went farther by including art pieces in his spaces. So here, it was important for Gropius to have a kind of integration of the arts, which was translated in the pedagogical program in the Bauhaus School of Design. But here in Venezuela, it was incorporated also to the building itself, and with the special areas where they have, for example, texture workshops, visual lab. That was a little bit odd for that period. So it showed also the interest of the designer in embed art in the building. So Villanueva, which is the designer of this school, for example, emphasized in the same way as Gropius the importance of the integration of the arts in architecture, and is evidenced through this plan. On the other hand, as a second, Gropius identified the concepts of technical architectural relationships concerned also that were also concerned for Le Corbusier, and also was concern of local architects. That was an aspect discussed on the Pan American Architecture Congress in that period, was identified in the School of Lima and Rio, which is through a materials museum, which also for me was a little bit odd, or technical workshop. So in Rio, they have all this huge space dedicated to technical museum workshop with some samples of materials. And also they have the same they used to have the same in Lima. It's not. Okay, so in laws from architectural form to society, are those which determine and describe effects on people arise from the spatial form. The Bauhaus building no longer hosts an educational institution. It is now known as Bauhaus Foundation headquarters and hosts design workshops from other educational institutions in its spaces and has exhibitions that open to the public. Some significant spatial characteristics of the building came to light during the exploration of the building. The first is the importance of the space under the bridge, which is a kind of hall between, is this one, which is a kind of hall between the two main entrances. And the second one is the transparency of the facades, which transform the perception of the building, reinforcing the sense of unity from one volume to another. And it was shown also in the VGA. I don't have a picture that shows how close you see from one building to other, but it was shown on the VGA. And the third one was the occupation of the exterior spaces, the stairs, the ramp linked to the main building, which is related to the shadow of the building in summer. And the other type of observation I did, and the second case study was this one through recorded data with a static camera in key strategic spaces. So the evaluation was made using the current layout of the school in Lima with that has extensions from the original design since 1953. And the camera recordings were made on Thursday and Friday because the design studio modules were taught on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So one day was related to the designs with the day where design studio stopped, and the other one a regular day. And it was also possible to obtain like 500 traces from those recordings. And it was possible to observe that the highest number of traces were recorded on B3, which is here on the main entrance. On the first landing, which is here, which is a space with lower visibility than the main hall, but this has a greater connectivity because it's next to the staircase. The second highest number of B6 landing, with all the higher number of traces were recorded on the landings, which are also the link to the design studios. And the interesting thing was that here is located the supply store. So the results were different from the kind of the simulation because the supply store moved also the how they interact on the building. So these are the recording traces and the location of the camera and what it registered. Okay, so in the discussion conclusion from the results, it can be stated that the modernism has indeed influenced the design of these architectural schools to various degrees. And there have been also reinterpretation of these ideas. It was possible to identify Gropius' idea of the integration of the arts in the pedagogical curriculum, and also, but also, as I explained before, in the school in Venezuela they were further by including art pieces as key elements in their spaces. In terms of the importance of the technique, all case studies evidence that their materiality, the difference lies in the inclusion of these concepts in the pedagogical curriculum and the spaces created or designed as a result. Moreover, the material characteristics are the ones that condition the human perception in all the case studies and are explored differently by each Latin American designer. In other words, the transparent materials, textures, and build form in all cases create a significant difference between permeability and visibility. The regulating line, which is also a Le Corbusier concept, was found throughout the axial analysis in all the Latin American schools to a greater degree than in the Bauhaus building. The Le Corbusier idea about spatial sequence organization, spaces and perception had a strong influence not only on the discourse, but also in terms of spatial configuration, and the ring pattern layout in the CCA is a synthesis of these intentions. So the fact that it was not possible to visit all case study sites was one of the limitations of this research, restricting the results to the observations in the school in Lima. And so this research fills the gap in the analysis of architecture by bringing together the discourse of the designers, the build form, the program, and the non-discursive aspects of space, which are directly affect human perceptions and dynamics. It reinterprets Hilliard's idea, originally thought to describe city as an urban object, in order to analyze architecture. The findings of the 3 stages of analysis frame on Hilliard's ideas about the generation of the form made it possible to join different layers of each case study. The discourse analysis, as part of the first stage, helped me to identify key spatial characteristics of the modern movement and its similarities in Latin America schools of architecture. Finally, I think the discussion of modernism recalls the importance of the materiality of the space as a key element in human perception. All case studies, designers discuss the importance of the material to achieve a particular effect and to experiment with it in their buildings. The effect of the material on the sensorial experience will also be followed up by a further research involving not only the degree of visibility or permeability, but also the sensorial perceptions, which may influence behavioral and interaction patterns. So this is it. This one is a photo of the school in Venezuela, and this one is in Rio, designed back in the 50s. And I was really surprised how they share some similarities, even though back in that time, also communication was really difficult, but through magazines or a yearly congress or something like that. And I was really glad to find some similarities that are materialized in their buildings that come from their way of thinking. So that's it.